pretty common topic for our team, which is a global team. We have people across the world. We have team members in China. Is how do I connect my applications running outside of China to either users, applications, data centers, Azure regions inside of China? So I'm going to talk and relay some learnings and information from many customer meetings, and we'll split this into private connectivity, so on private IPs from private WANs to Azure VNets, etc. And then public connectivity, so from users inside or outside of China to applications inside or outside of China. So let's take a typical global customer. Here in black, we've got the non-China, so the global use of Azure. So for example, a global customer might have regions inside of the US East here, in Europe, and then inside of Asia, Southeast Asia, Singapore, for example. A lot of enterprise customers would double up on this, perhaps have 6 regions, etc. And how you get between regions inside of what I'll call Azure Global, ran by Microsoft. Between these regions, you might have global VNet peering, you might be using virtual WAN, UDRs, you might be pulling the traffic back out to your own wide area network and using your private WAN circuits. Maybe you've got a global backbone already that connects your sites together across the world, your data centers. And that's all pretty well known. Even if you want to connect in from maybe an internet user in Asia to an Azure public IP in the US, there's the whole story around cold potato routing using the Microsoft Global Network. But when it comes to connectivity to China, it's a little bit different. We need a little bit more thought on this. And there's a few reasons for that. Fundamentally, Azure has got regions in China, increasingly so. We've got 5 regions. I just checked here on the public documentation. Looks like we've got 2 in East China, in Shanghai, and then 3 up near Beijing. One important point to understand is when you're thinking about connectivity here, you can't just extend your services you've got in the black Azure Global to Azure China and use things like VNet peering or express route connections or common virtual WAN hub to hub. And fundamentally why that is, it's down to the fact that Azure China is not operated and ran by Microsoft. It's ran by a company called 21Vianet due to local regulation. So we can kind of think about this fundamentally as a different CSP. So it's almost like this becomes a multi-cloud story, despite the services being common across the two. Like you can deploy virtual WAN inside of Azure China, for example. You just can't deploy hubs inside of the same virtual WAN because they're different, fundamentally, clouds. So what if, for example, you're a global enterprise? This is quite a common scenario. You've got, if you do business all around the world, you have all these Azure regions in the various time zones, but you also have a large market inside of China, and you want to connect your either users in China or your data centers in China back outside of China. Let's take the first one. Let's say you've deployed some sort of application inside of one of the Azure China regions, and you've got a requirement for that application to talk back over private IPs, either to your on-prem data center inside of a country outside of China, or you want to come out of Azure China and come into Azure Global into one of your other regions. How might we do that? Well, there's a few options. Option number 1, which is probably the most simplest option, is you have some sort of private connectivity based on VPN. So you take a VPN service here, you take a VPN service here, or a VPN service on-prem, and you build IPsec tunnels over the internet. This will work. This will fundamentally work. There's some hoops that you have to go through to run a VPN across the China border, but it will work. One of the observations is you won't get the best performance. Sort of common connectivity in and out of China via the internet is subject to various filtering platforms, and that's going to kill the performance of the VPN and therefore the performance inside of the tunnel. So we generally find that just going for that approach probably won't get it done for any serious enterprise, despite it technically working. You'll see probably quite a lot of variance in latency, otherwise known as jitter, maybe some packet loss, etc. Okay, so is there a more robust way? Well, yes. So if inside of China you have connectivity to ExpressRoute, we have the same ExpressRoute structure for various POPs. So for example, here's China East, China North, here's the Asia regions, and here are some POPs that we have in Shanghai and in Beijing, and you can go through this document and find out where they are, you deploy circuits there, same sort of thing you're used to in Azure Global. But let's say we take a ExpressRoute connection in one of these POPs inside of China. If we bring this to life on a map, perhaps, let's say I've got Shanghai here, China East. Let's say I deploy a circuit here. I need to get from that circuit where it pops out in a meet me location in Shanghai back to somewhere else in the world where my other network exists outside of China. What's very common to do is to go via Hong Kong because it's the nearest POP that we have to China. So let's explain how that might work in a couple of ways. One would be if you have an existing WAN provider, do they have the ability to provision your connectivity into this ExpressRoute location inside of China? So inside of Shanghai here, we might go onto this page, look up the Beijing POP, and we see that okay, there's two in there, one by China Telecom, one by GDS. Which providers can provide ExpressRoute there? So you see it's China Telecom there, China Telecom, China Mobile, China Unicorn, GDS. So they are the only approved providers to get ExpressRoute in those POPs. What does that mean? It means unless your WAN is already provided by one of those telcos, you're going to need an intermediate telco that can do the subcontracting and the intermediate operations required. So let's just say for you've got a WAN provided by someone like AT&T or Verizon, which spans the global Azure Global sites. You've got ExpressRoute here in all these locations, which is sucked back into your wide area network. You go to your provider and you say, okay, get me connectivity to China. And what they do is they would have to work with the providers listed on the previous page there to cross the China border in an approved way. There's a process in place with local providers to do that. And what you'll find is the providers here that can provide ExpressRoute are very likely to be the providers that can help you with the cross-border comms as well. So that's where you would approach your WAN provider. They would help you with the cross-border comms. Let's say that you want to organize this yourself. How might that work? Let's say you have a global network provided by a WAN provider that can't get involved in the China cross-border comms for you. One option would be, well, okay, you know that you can build your use of Azure to include Azure East Asia, which is in Hong Kong. If you took an ExpressRoute circuit here in Hong Kong, then you would have a leg effectively coming out of the Microsoft network in Hong Kong. And we can come back into this document, look at the Hong Kong POP. We can see there's two of them, Equinix, Advantage. There's a lot of different providers here. Much more a bigger list of providers. And you can also see, for example, here's China Telecom. So you could start a conversation with China Telecom where you would say, okay, I've got my use of Azure happening over here. This is kind of the bubble that I know today. I've deployed services in Azure China over here. And what I'm going to do is talk to China Telecom and get an express route circuit here, an express route circuit here, and then also talk to China Telecom about doing the bit in the middle, stitching the two together, getting the routes from here and getting the routes from here. And there'll be an element of, do I need virtual WAN? Do I need global reach? But effectively, the message here is you're working with the local providers. You're working with the providers that can, A, do express route in a local nearby POP like Hong Kong, who can also provide express route in China and can also do the stitching together for you. You're not talking to the CSP, you're not talking to Microsoft. Same would be applicable if you're trying to solve this for other providers. You're working with someone that's already worked with the China authorities to do these regulated cross-border comms in an approved way. Just before I finish the video, I also want to touch on this idea of users going across the public internet into China. So a really common example here might be you're a global customer who has deployed their applications inside of Azure Global, and you've got public IPs and all of these applications that get delivered out of the Microsoft Edge network. You're very happy with the performance that gives you for your global users. But let's say you don't have the application hosted in China, but you do have users in China. So you have users at home using Chinese ISPs who want to access your application. Maybe you're a global luxury brand who sell to China, and when China users go onto their laptops at home, they browse the internet and they hit your site. Ultimately, it gets directed via DNS to an IP address outside of China in the Microsoft network globally. Again, this is where you might get Chinese users reporting negative performance. They might say, it's a bit hit and miss, pages take long to load. Why is that? That's because when they're doing the non-authorized cross-border comms, so imagine the borders there between China and the rest of the world, you're passing through the various filtering platforms, which might negatively impact your performance. So what would be the possible solutions there? Well, you could either you could deploy a copy of your application inside of one of the Azure China regions and get a public IP ultimately, and then the users get routed directly. Everything happens inside of China. Happy days. You've got kind of distributed application level and backend access. Maybe the backend communicates inside of your network via all the stuff we talked about on the private side. Another option would be, if you don't want to go the whole hog and deploy a full use of an Azure region in China, well, what if you're using a content delivery platform here that caches your front-end content, if it's mainly static content? Does this content delivery network also have the ability to cache your content inside of China? So could they start caching your content within their POPs inside of China? There'll be only certain CDN providers that do that, but that's worth exploring. You have to also acknowledge there, though, in that case, yes, the users to the cache content, that's going to be good performance, but when the CDN POPs in China pull from your origins in the global Azure regions, that will also cross the border. So your origin pull, your origin sort of syncing of data is going to be subject to that same performance implications we talked about. But that's not such a big deal because you pull when you can, and then you deliver in an expedient fashion to the users. Okay, well, I know that was a bit of a whirlwind tour, and the devil's definitely in the details, and normally this involves conversations with our team and maybe local resources in the China market. But hopefully now that gives you a flavor for how this might work if your organization is looking at connectivity to Azure China or connectivity from Azure Global to people inside of China. And we covered the private side there and the various express route POP connectivity, working with a local provider, and then we covered the internet users, maybe looking at CDN solutions. Okay, thanks for watching again.